Morning, everyone. Welcome to our November meeting of the Curriculum Committee. Today's topic is Regents exams and New York State testing 3 through 8, correct? Yes,
Correct.
3 through 8. And once again, we're lucky to have Dr. Baer and Dr. Dean here to explain information and data that they have before us. And I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So today this morning, we're going to give a general overview of our New York State testing program, which involves the 3 through 8 testing in ELA, in mathematics and science, as well as the New York State Regents exams. We're going to start at the high school level and just begin with a few metrics outside of the New York State assessments related to the high school, including our graduation rates, which has been a topic of discussion. Just a reminder in terms of New York State, when it's talking about the graduation rate, it's the percentage of students who have earned a local or Regents diploma within 4 years of beginning 9th grade. When they start 9th grade, that's defined as their cohort year. So the first time they enter 9th grade, no matter where it is, whether it's in Port, whether it's in another district, so on and so forth, that becomes their cohort and the clock ticks. They've got 4 years to graduate, that's what they're timing. So the graduation rate, that's the percentage of students who receive their diploma within those 4 years. New York State has an advanced designation rate. That's the percentage of students who earn a more challenging diploma endorsement. We'll talk about the criteria. Just a reminder as we go through the data, not every piece of data are available quite yet for Nassau County and New York State, especially for the 2022 year. These are the general graduation requirements. Typically in New York State, you need 22 credits. In Port, you need a minimum of 22 and a half because there is a local requirement that's above and beyond the New York State requirements, that's senior experience. The difference between the advanced designation diploma and the regular Regents diploma really has to do with the distribution of credits and the addition of a few extra Regents exams in science and in mathematics, and the chance to do a FLAXB, which is sort of a recently developed language Regents equivalent, or a 5-credit sequence in some other area if you're not taking language. Those are the broad graduation requirements. These are the graduation rates. 21, 22, last year's rates, those are not the official report card rates, those haven't been released yet, but that's what we have based on our data. So we are getting this past year, 96% of Schreiber students graduated within 4 years of beginning 9th grade. That is about just a little bit above where the county average is, about 10 percentage points above where the state average is. 72, about 3/4 of the students, 76 last year, are earning that advanced designation rate. It's a little more, about 10 percentage points higher than the county average. So that's what we're working on. Clearly, the graduation data, that's important. You get 96%, which seems great, but you're missing 4 or 5% of the kids are not graduating, and some of them might be picking up a diploma in August. That's not part of this 4-year. We do get a few more through in August, but we are still missing a few. SAT, ACT scores, some of the national assessments that take place. This has been an interesting few years for the national testing, those ACTs, SATs, with colleges moving more towards test optional admissions. There has been a decline. Some kids are no longer taking those tests. This first slide has the ACT, and I ran those numbers a bunch of times because Schreiber having 45% of the class taking the ACT, that is really high. In New York State, the average is about 10%. Nationally, it's about 35, 36%. But Schreiber's, we love our ACT tests up here. Kids are doing well, and really going against the trend, which for the last 5-6 years has been declining ACT scores. You see that in the chart going from 20.7 down to 19.8. I think that was the first time in 30 years it dipped below 20 nationally. But Schreiber's been able to maintain and really improve over last year their ACT scores. SAT scores, you've got what used to be English, now they call evidence-based reading and writing, average scores. 2021 saw a increase at Schreiber, and but these 2022 scores, this is the score for kids who graduated in 2022, not necessarily kids who took it in 2022. Some of those students, they graduated in 2022, they might have taken the exam in 2021, just it's a cohort thing, but for the class of 2022, that's their average score. National merit, that's based on PSAT scores. Is what qualifies you for the competition, and then your grades and recommendations continue that. This year we have 28 commended students. We've got 5 semifinalists. We don't know the status of finalists till February, January, February, and winners get announced in April-ish. So I'll turn it over now to Dr. Barrett to talk about the Regents examinations.
Since June of 2020, we have yet to have a completely typical Regents administration. So in June of 2020, August of 2020, January of 2021, the state canceled all Regents exams. We had that again in this past January of 2022. Last June of 2021, we only offered 4 examinations. The federal government only requires math, science, and ELA. So you see that the examinations offered were Algebra 1 for math, Living Environment and Environmental Science for science, and the ELA exam for students in 11th grade for ELA. Students had the option of whether or not they wanted to participate in these exams. If they did not, they would get an E, which you see on the transcript stands for an exemption. That means they did not have to take it. This past June, we expected to have a more typical examination. However, we ended up having that early June US history examination was canceled, and it was again canceled in August. So that would be the only difference in exam administration for June of 2022 and August of 2022. Students in the June and August administration, and it will continue for the upcoming year, have this special appeal option. So this is students who sit for the exam are required to pass the class, have seat time, any of the other typical requirements to pass the course. If they score between a 50 and a 64, students are eligible for a special appeal. And SA, you can see how we have the truncated version, that's how it shows up on the transcript. They will receive a special appeal automatically. Students do not have to ask for this option. If they have met the other requirements, we are automatically granting through the appeal process a special appeal. You'll see where we have some dashes, and we can talk about whether the exams weren't offered, or you'll see for the June 2022 administration, we do not yet have state data. Here you see the Algebra 1 results. This is one of the exams that was offered in 2020, 2021, but you'll see that we had 23 students at Schreiber who participated, as opposed to in 18-19, you see that we have 351 students. So you can see our participation rate varied quite a bit. You'll see, if I may speak for my Weber colleagues, you'll see that the accelerated students in math take Algebra 1 at Weber. So that's where you have the 105 participation rate back in 18-19 and the 92 student participation rate in 21-22. These are all accelerated students. So their data will not be reflected in our Schreiber data.
Before you guys, just make sure, I want to frame the header there, right? So you've got the number of students. That second column, that's the percent who have scored at a level 3 or above. For some of these, especially the early Common Core Regents examinations, they started grading them on a scale of level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. So level 3, 4, 5, those are all proficiency. Oops. Those are all proficiency, and the mastery is, I think if we just wake it up, and the mastery is the level 5.
And you'll see in 1920, even for the exams that have converted to levels, we don't have that type of analysis based on the IDW information that we have, the information data warehouse. Move to the display again.
We do have a topic.
No, go back, come back up.
I think.
You got it.
Press computers. For those of you at home watching, we're trying to get the visual back up on the screen. So that's why we stopped.
Stop in the middle of the presentation. It's no longer popping up. You restart.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Go back on.
I mentioned that the students who were here.
Oh, we're out of copies. Nobody else can get people back.
I have.
Yeah, in the middle, my machine was not asleep or anything. Now just pop up. Because the wireless signal is free.
Yes, I know it's on Bluetooth.
Something with that.
It's right.
John, see, on the right of the top.
Now, it's Bluetooth. It's an older Apple TV, so it might not have the range.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, to move up a little more.
Oh, is that why I don't have service on my phone?
That was just on the
No,
shelf. Dr. Bear, come down here with me. You just want me to have it, that's fine. You can stay there. Where are we?
I feel like this is a test.
Yeah.
I'll just roll back and forth.
Back in business.
Anything else you'd like to add about Algebra 1?
Well, hold on, so I just wanted to talk about those, what the L3 and the L5. Later on, we'll see those listed as passing and mastery for the older Regents exams.
And also for 1920, because we did not have that data available.
Correct. Okay.
Here in geometry, we did see a decrease in the overall percentage rate of students achieving level 3, which is passing, level 5, which is mastery. The percentage is still substantially less than the movement we've seen in the county, but this is an example of really using a data analysis to look at the incorrect responses and find trends as to where we can better support our students. Here we have Algebra 2 results. This is typically the barrier to an advanced Regents diploma if all of the other requirements are met. So this is a place where we really look to support students who are looking for that more advanced diploma. In English, we did see a change in levels that may speak to a possible COVID impact. We also had students who had been really working digitally to submit assignments through remote instruction, through hybrid instruction, and suddenly shifting back to our pen and paper type of testing. So that has been some of our conversation as well. This is really an area to investigate. Why is that change different than what we've seen throughout the county? And we will certainly investigate the state data when it becomes available. In global, June of 2019 and January of 2020, Port Washington students were taking the transitional exam. So since that point, our students have now shifted to the new framework, which reflects our C3 standards. That's college, career, and civic life standards. So it is a different exam. So this will be very important to continue looking at the trends we have from the 21-22 school year into 22-23, and certainly our item analysis. U.S. history, this is the exam, the only exam that was canceled in the 22 administration, so we do not have data from this. However, we certainly will look forward to how our students are performing in the upcoming year and looking at our local measures of proficiency in this area. Any student who passed the class in the 21-22 school year was eligible for an exemption. In earth science, we did maintain our passing rates and improved mastery rates. This is really a skills and strategies based exam. You'll see that this was one of the 4 Regents examinations that was offered in 2021. Our rate was lower than Weber's because that is the accelerated class for Weber. However, it would be our students who had not accelerated, and we only had 13 students in the building who were taking that class and opted to take the exam. Anything you would like to share about Weber?
No, you hit it.
Living environment is more of a literacy-based exam, and you see that we improved both our passing and our mastery rates. This is where we really look to support our students to make sure that they have those cross-cutting skills I'll speak to in a few minutes to be successful in this area. Students who are in chemistry typically take earth science and living environment on an accelerated track, or just living environment if they're not accelerated, and that really leads them into chemistry. This is a particularly rigorous exam, and in this particular case, if you look at the past years of missing exam participation, you would see that students could potentially be jumping into take chemistry as their first science Regents. If you look at data from across the state, and while we don't have the specific numbers available yet, if you look at articles, there have been a lot of presentations about chemistry and how the numbers drop significantly from around the state. I am thrilled that we were able to maintain that 94% passing rate, and this is certainly a place that we will continue to look to make sure that students have those spiral lab skills that are required to be really successful in chemistry as well. In physics, there has been a change in the conversion chart from the raw to the scale score, and so this talks about how the score is weighted based on the difficulty of the question, and that's a change from previous years. So this would be another area that if you start Googling the physics Regents from 2022, you'll see a lot of information and articles online about how people reacted to that type of change. So it's important that in addition to looking at our percentage of passing and mastery, we're really looking at the breakdown and the analysis to see if there are patterns where we can really help to support students. If you look at the Nassau County rate from 18-19 to 21-22, you see the passing rate dropped from 87% to 68%. That's a pretty significant drop. At Schreiber, we went from a 97% passing rate with a very similar number of participants to a 94% passing rate. So we were at least in the same ballpark, which speaks to the larger instructional process happening throughout the year that helps students to be prepared for this exam. So if you look at the overall takeaways, and I know we have a lot of numbers that we're throwing at you. So One of the biggest things for me is that since we have had such interrupted exam administration since June of 2020, it's really important that we're looking at multiple measures to make sure that students are really learning what we need them to, and that our overall process is reflected in our levels of proficiency and mastery. If we have a strong instructional process, we're able to achieve well on these exams. This is still only a single data point. We do not teach so that students can do well on a test. We have instructional practices that really are structured on the foundations of what students need to know and why it's important for students to learn this. And we align that so this will also be available on our percent passing and percent mastery. We really try to strike that balance because it is a data point, it's not the most important thing. However, it is still a graduation requirement. So we do need our students to be successful, and should they be one of the students who did not succeed the first time taking a Regents exam, we provide other avenues of support for future administrations. We do participate in the January Regents administration and also in August. In preparation for each of those exams, we have support classes that prepare students, because the further you get from the instruction throughout the year, the more challenging it can be to make sure that you're really fresh and staying up with the content to review. So we look at our practices over the course of the year. We have locally developed assessments. We have multiple teachers who have the same class really collaborate together to figure out where are those benchmarks that we need to make sure that students have the same horizontal alignment, they have the same outcomes, and they're prepared for the next class. We have multiple measures that go beyond just having a test to being a performance-based task, a portfolio, a project, and other types of assessments. And of course, you have the state data and how Schreiber compares at the state and local and county measures. And of course, you heard the AP data from the past class for students who participate at the higher level of coursework. So where do we go from here? We've been working with chair people at the high school to look at the information we have available. We are trying to investigate the gap analysis and wrong answer analysis so that we can find those patterns, especially if we have more than one teacher at the same course level. We want to find the strengths that are already existing in our building and leverage those strengths so that we have our very experienced faculty helping each other to support our specific population of students. We also want to look at the breakdown of the populations and how they're achieving. So if we find that there may be a subgroup who needs additional support, well, why is that happening? Is there a skill deficit before they get to the class that needs to be addressed, or is it something that we specifically addressed in that class? We have been maximizing our department meeting time after school and our professional development meeting times, because with the high school scheduling, it's challenging to have that collaboration time with everybody in a department during the day, because we need a broad offering for students during the 6-period school day. So this is really a great time for teachers in that single department to be able to support each other, have conversations about instructional practices, challenges, opportunities. One of the big topics that I've been talking about this year so far is the cross-cutting skills that we really need to promote success in all academic areas. So if you look at the literacy standards that are present in the C3 Social Studies framework, the NGSS Next Generation Science Standards, and certainly in the English Language Arts Standards, how can we really support that literacy standard in each of those content areas in a way that's really aligned and makes that transition for students from one class to the next the most successful that it can be? We want that transfer of skills. We are also looking for opportunities for professional development. In fact, we just sent the Social Studies Department to a conference together, which was a very special opportunity to make sure that they had that chance to have those deeper conversations together, to hear this information, to talk about it, what it means at each level. And I look forward to doing more of those things in the future with each department. We are also looking at individual students. Without going too into detail, we looked at the rising seniors, so our current seniors, all of their transcripts over the summer to identify patterns where students have been achieving at one level with or without exemptions, and figuring out how that would have been, how that would have fleshed out in a more typical Regents examination high school experience, and making sure that if we do have students who are missing an assessment or missing a class, we're really looking at ways to help and support individual students. And certainly we are looking at our broad course offerings to make sure that we are really aligned with curricular standards and to see if there are any other opportunities where we can meet our graduation requirements and still offer students a variety of classes to take and achieve levels of proficiency in order to graduate. Oh, go ahead.
We've also talked about articulating middle school to high school and making the connection on what we need to do to make sure they're prepared to go to the high school. So we've started that with our department chairs. Just small, and then we'll go bigger with the actual department.
I just want to add on, in terms of professional development, our superintendent's conference day last week was really important in that, in addition, unrelated to student concept, that we did certainly send the social studies teachers to a conference, but we had an outside expert come in, speak to all of our 4-5 grades, 4 and 5 science teachers about the next generation science standards. That same outside expert came, spoke to the science department about many changes at the high school level. So, those chances when we start bringing in people outside and give folks a chance to work with each other are really important. That's it for the regents. Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Does anybody want to do one of them?
No, please.
Okay, so thank you for this. This was actually very illuminating, because there are a lot of things I didn't know. Beginning with the graduation rate. So I wonder, because there are some kids who take longer to get to the finish line, but they do.
They do.
And so our graduation rate doesn't capture those kids who actually are graduating, just they're taking a little longer than the 4 years,
Correct.
but they are getting a diploma.
We are capturing additional students. The rate that we put in that table is the rate that gets published in the state report card and in, Newsday, for example.
Do we have a rate as to how many kids we are actually graduating? Because some kids, maybe they'll repeat a grade, or they'll take the Regents exams a couple of times in order,
So we track all of the students. We know those who drop out. We know those who eventually graduate. So we do have a presentation a little
Okay, I
later this year, which will go into more detail. But when we say 96% graduation rate for last year, that doesn't capture how many kids made it through in the summer, an additional.
About 10 students
Yeah.
in the summer.
Which bumps it up,
Yeah.
but it's still
I
not where we
understand.
want it to be.
But they're able to go,
right?
to go someplace with a diploma though, they,
Yes.
right, so,
And we do have the Twilight program that's starting right now, so we do have individualized plans for students and how long it will take them using that and summer school combinations.
okay, I will sit tight for that presentation, thank you. So I'm wondering, I love the fact that there's a wrong answer analysis in order to improve the teacher end of it, I guess, or the instructional end of it. Do you know how long that's been going on at Schreiber? Is this new with you, or is this something that's been
This will be a
practiced?
new, this is part of the professional development, helping folks become a little more comfortable with the use of data. Data is not necessarily a bad word. It can be informative and helpful, especially when you're doing things such as gap analysis to see, you've got 5 sections of living environment. How do kids do on these different questions? Is there one teacher that seems to be hitting it and nailing it? If so, well, let's share. We've got a lot of wonderful resources in the school. And when you do things like a gap analysis, a wrong answer analysis, that's where you can start seeing where, some of your pockets of excellence are and who can help and provide professional development. So that's part of the professional development will be we've started and will continue with and push for this year and onward.
Personally, I think it's brilliant, and I commend you for, if that's an initiative, I commend you for that, because it's always difficult to look at oneself and say, okay, here's where I need improvement, so whether it's in any profession, and sharing best practices, so I thank you for that. Have you looked at it, do you know if there's a disparity, and I asked this about the AP exams, and I'm going to ask this in the next presentation as well, between how the kids are doing in class and how they're doing on the exams. because the exams are scored outside the building. There was a series of geometry regions exams where they were scored incorrectly. And I think students actually discovered the mistakes and then had to appeal to the regions, the Board of Regents, and then a bunch of questions were invalidated. So sometimes I look at these outside scored tests with a bit of skepticism, because I always liked it when the child could look at the test, know what they got wrong, discuss the wrong answer with the teacher. Perhaps the teacher marked it wrong, perhaps there could have been two answers. To me, there are a lot of things that go into scoring of these standardized tests when they're done outside. Also because, so I'm wondering, how, do you see, or have you looked at discrepancies between how a student is doing in class and how they're scoring on a Regents exam? In other words, do you have an A student bombing a Regents exam, or a student who's struggling, who suddenly is getting a 5? And
Those are, and we spoke during the previous presentation with APs, that's a very good analysis to do. It's a little more challenging now simply because the Regents for the last several years aren't exactly, they don't have the same importance that they might have in the past, in that you've got these exemption options, special appeal options. I will say, I certainly would imagine teachers do that. They compare their final course grades with how kids are doing on the Regents. The New York State Board of Regents, they have recommended to really disassociate the Regents exam, the Regents score, from the student's final course grade. And that's, teachers are very nervous about that, and with not just here at Fort, across Nassau, right, across New York State. So that's been their recommendation, and I
Can
think.
you please elaborate on what the fear is?
Well, the fear is you are no longer, you don't have the same incentive from a student point of view to do well. If this exam is not counting towards my final course average, then it's not as important. So maybe I dial it in, or I don't have to sweat as much as I would normally, is the thinking. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. There are a lot of changes that are going to be coming in place with the Regents. Even our 3 through 8 assessments are all moving to computer-based testing. I think it's a matter of time before the Regents exams move towards that. And with some of the new initiatives in New York State, it's a question as to where the Regents exams will actually fit in to graduation requirements. So we are truly in an area of transition, but what you're saying in terms of how is your curriculum and your grading aligning with the expectations on these exams, that's an important one, without getting too carried away, because there are two different approaches to grading as well.
I have one more.
I would also say from the middle school perspective, I think our coursework is harder than the Regents.
Yeah, I would.
So a lot of times when we're sending our grades, we grade our Regents in-house, but we're very hard on our students. And not in a necessarily negative way, we expect a lot of them, we're holding them to high standards. So when we grade them, I think we're holding them to the same standards where other districts may not be holding their students to the same standards. So sometimes when they go out and be graded, it's more neutral of grading opposed to our standards that we're expecting students to be at.
Does that mean that if you compare our results to other school districts, is our higher bar impacting how it looks to the outside world?
The higher bar in terms of.
Are we scoring our students on the Regents harder so that they don't look like they're as
That's an
successful?
excellent question, and there is professional development that's worth having in terms of in-house scoring. And I know that in my previous lives, teachers, since they have such high standards for their students, sometimes when they're grading the Regents, their expectation, well, I don't care what that rubric says, they should have known this, right? And, that can impact it. So we haven't done any Regents scoring training, not since I've been here in the last few months, nor with Dr. Bear, but that is something that is a good practice. And it's important, especially with the changes in the examinations. it's important to make sure we're all on board with how they are being assessed and evaluated as well and scored.
You have a conference request in Frontline right now.
Excellent.
What does that mean?
In other words,
For
people are looking
for
to
professional
professional development on this very issue.
My testing coordinator for Regents examinations would like to look into professional development offered by BOCES to support that.
That's wonderful. That's great. I do have one more question. For you, Ms. Javelin. The articulation, you said you're starting small. Is the starting, so I grabbed onto the starting part. Is this a new initiative as well, or is this something that's not been done in the district before?
It's been informal, no, so I would say it's been informal. We've spoken over the summer saying we want to formalize it more and get our departments to talk more together. Because there is, with the graduate profile of eighth grader, there is real connection that we need to make sure that our students are prepared to go to the high school. And without that articulation, we don't really know if we're doing what we need to do. So it's also about reflection on what we're doing in our building to make sure that we are preparing them for the high school and high school coursework.
Great.
So not to give away the end here, but, but that question lends itself to a broader issue. There's so many wonderful practices here for teachers doing great things, working with each other. I think that part of the struggle, and I think part of what we're trying to put in place now is a more systemic approach to those, rather than having pockets of excellence, it is a system of excellence. So it doesn't rely on, Bobby, Joe, Billy, Sue talking to each other and, we like each other, so we're gonna do a great articulation. It has to be formalized more in the system, and that's what we're trying to get in place. There are incredible things to support kids, support struggling kids, to help kids get over the finish line. All those things are happening. We just want to try to make it a little more systemic so that they don't depend on people, but they're they're part of the system. So that, when you come to Port, this is what Port does.
Thank you.
Regents, we can always go back to Regents. We have 3 through 8. And we still have a couple more hours left for this meeting. So, okay. So the 3 through 8 assessment data, it's similar to what we saw with the Regents exams. There were no 3 through 8 assessments at all during the 1920 school year. In the spring of 2021, when they started again, they were changed. They were shorter. Only 1 session, typically they go over 2 days, and really a low participation rate statewide. And then in spring 2022, they reverted to their normal assessments. When folks hear about opt-out and opt-out rates, that's for the 3 through 8 assessments. There's no opt-out of the Regents, those are graduation requirements. So you don't get to opt out of those, you have to take those to graduate by and large. Participation rate, this is the flip side of the opt-out rate of where Port was for participation. So grade 3 in 2019, you read across, 84% of 3rd graders did participated in the ELA, 79, 82, 72, 65, 60, drops a little bit in 7th and 8th grade. And that's not uncommon in other schools as well. This is not it's not a crazy opt-out rate or participation rate. It's up there in terms of from a positive point of view, in terms of Nassau County and statewide. That's not a bad participation rate at all. This is the performance on the ELA exams. Just pointing out in 2021, it's really tough to do longitudinal comparisons simply because there was nothing in 2020. 2021, they were very different. But this is the proficiency rate for Port, Nassau County, New York State. Proficiency rate of those students scoring at a level 3, level 4, level 5. 65% in 2019, just so you can see, 65% of Port students grade 3 ELA proficient. Nassau County average was 66. New York State average was 52. You see how that proficiency rate for the ELA jumps in grade 8. So it is challenging to do longitudinal, but if you want to follow a cohort, so those students who were in grade 3 back in 2019, right? They were in grade 5 in 2021, grade 6 in 2022, if you wanted to follow a cohort. Those students who were in grade 4 in 2019. And we can also see those that were in grade 5. The tests are different. Following a cohort, I typically like doing that when you have consistency with the exams, but since we don't have that consistency, you know, it's tough to really place notable significance on it. But, you know, that's something worth tracking, and certainly looking at where our students are relative to the county average, relative to the state average is important as well. This is our mathematics participation. Once again, you know, relative, not a bad opt-out rate in terms of, you know, not a excessively high opt-out rate, a very positive participation rate. In grade 8, you know, we have any student taking algebra in grade 8 does not need to take the Math 8 assessment. But even taking those students out, that's still that's the participation rate. There's a dropout for the mathematics, a drop in the mathematics participation rate.
But we have probably close to 80 kids taking calculus.
Yeah, we have the numbers on the table before.
Yeah. This year,
That's a
last year
number
was
that's
109, I think.
That's a quarter of the class that's quote unquote not participating, right?
So,
Math also goes up because it's the second test, so parents opt out of the English or don't, and then the rates often go up for math, because it's the second state test they take.
right, when that participation rate, I've pulled out, right, we're not using those algebra students in that participation rate at all, because they would not be participating, so it's not gonna count against us.
Got it.
So that's really other kids not in algebra, whatever that, 58%, 43 last year.
Got it.
So, math performance, you know, keep in mind that little note, accelerated 8th grade students don't take the Math 8. And that you're pulling out some of your highest achieving 8th grade students. So it would be natural that your overall proficiency rate is going to go down a little bit, and we certainly see that here.
And that's the same for,
Pardon me?
state, that's the same even for statewide. So I imagine other districts are also pulling out the high achieving kids who are taking algebra 1 or maybe algebra 2. I'm just looking at grade 8, grade 7. That will also affect Nassau County.
Yeah. Once again, if you were to try to follow a cohort, those 3rd graders in 2019, our current 7th grade, those 4th graders, and 5th graders in 2019.
So would it be fair to say that the grade 7 data is more in line with how our students would look had they not been pulled out for the 8th grade test?
I think that's probably more accurate overall in terms of their mathematics proficiency rate on those, yeah. Which doesn't mean we don't pay attention to what's happening in grade 8, of course. I
Absolutely,
mean, even for those students, we address that. Science, people often forget about science, but there is a grade 4 and a grade 8 science. We don't, even though all of the ELA and the mathematics are out, the state hasn't really put out the science results from last year. That's why that bottom row is empty. I do want to point out, for the 8th grade, you see that drop in proficiency. The Weber eighth graders who are taking earth science, they don't take the grade 8. That's where you're gonna see the drop. And those students are also passing that earth science with 100% mastery. So they're at that top level of mastery. So they're doing quite well in the earth science exam. But since they're not taking the grade 8, that proficiency rate for the remaining students does go down a little bit. I've mentioned this, in terms of reflection points on those 3 through 8 assessments, it's tough to make longitudinal comparisons. As Dr. Baer said, you always want to keep in mind the 3 through 8 assessments, they're not everything, they're important. But it's a single data point, a day or 2 days worth of work. We don't know what's going on in a student's life. We don't know. Maybe it was a hot day that day and they're taking in a hot classroom or a hot gymnasium, whatever it might be.
Right, and it's a long test, not all kids have to stand and sit for that test.
Yeah.
So it's
Not
still on
something-
time, right?
It's still on
It's still on
time.
time, but it's not, students, we don't give, elementary or middle school don't give 2-period tests, 3-period tests. And this is a long period test, not all students can sit for that stamina of time test.
Adults can.
Right.
Correct.
And, this is, of course, as I mentioned, this is the test that, the state requires, federal government requires, these are the tests, and, but it's not the only thing teachers use, of course. They have a variety of assessment tools, teacher-developed tests, classwork, projects, vendor-developed tests. We use NWEA. Every student takes the NWEA multiple times over the course of the year. That's an important locally developed, a vendor-developed test that we use. So there's a variety of assessments we use. How do you make progress? Is progress important on this? Yeah, progress is important. Important is really landing sort of in the middle of the pack to the, maybe the top 40% for most of those 3 through 8 assessments. It's not where we should be, period. And, in order to make progress, we have to see, okay, what's working, what's not. We talked about the use of the instructional data warehouse. That's where you can break down, find what the learning gaps are. These are the classrooms. You can compare the schools. You can do learning gaps compared to the district. You can break it down. The Nassau County BOCES instructional data warehouse is a powerful tool where you can really get a sense of, where the answer, what general standards are the students struggling with? Where can we do better? And you've got to analyze subgroup responses, gender, ethnicity, economic status to certainly address any inequities. We're able to do that with instructional data warehouse. Student performance, where, helps us know where in this ever-changing curriculum landscape, what we have to perhaps emphasize more. We use NWEA as a universal screener for all of our students. I think we can do a better job using it to measure growth during the year to help get kids back on track if we see them go astray. We started some training. We have some Wilson reading teachers. Wilson's a reading approach that is research-based and evidence-based and very effective. We trained 8 additional. We started the training of 8 additional Wilson reading teachers. The training takes about a year to complete, and they started that in July. So we'll have that available for services across all of our elementary schools. We need to identify, you can identify these kids really pre-K to 2 who are struggling, who's below on reading, literacy skills, numeracy skills. That has such a positive impact on how they will do throughout elementary and middle and high school. Kids struggling in grade 3 is a predictor of kids who will struggle in many ways in the high school if those deficiencies are not addressed. So we do have programs. We have, as I said earlier, this sense of pockets of excellence. And we have some of the best programs being used in our district. Foundations is a fantastic program. Hegedy, these are great programs, great approaches to teach phonics, phonemic awareness for our younger students. We're just not using them consistently across everywhere. And that's what we're trying to move towards. Once again, Read 180, System 44, reading intervention programs, we're using them. You look those up, those are great programs. We do use them. We use leveled literacy intervention, LLI, great programs. We go out to high school for kids who are struggling. It's about using them consistently with fidelity and across the board. And that's where, the professional development needs to be ongoing. We've got a lot of new learning standards out there. We've got a lot of research-based interventions that some people are using. Share the wealth, learn more about it, and bring people together to help them ultimately support our kids. So, said it a few times, we had a big professional development day, and the first half of it was spent on our Portrait of a Graduate. A lot of those skills aren't really measured in a 3 through 8 assessment. You don't publish scores on those skills. So we always want to keep in mind that here at Port, we've decided, right? There are a lot of other things that are important for all of our students, and those all have to get woven in to the curriculum, to the instruction. I'm a firm believer, good curriculum, good instruction, good interventions in place, the scores will take care of themselves. They really will. These are not the most challenging exams. We can do well on these. Our students can do well on the exams. With good instruction, good intervention, consistent approach, especially with our struggling students, timely interventions, early interventions, all that makes a difference. So, Portrait of a Graduate, that's our North Star, that's what we're focused on. We always want to keep the focus on that. And I do think we get this more consistent curricular and intervention approach, we'll be able to support our kids better, pre-K through 12, and the scores will take care of themselves. They really will. As long as we're paying attention to our students. So that's one of those quotes. Yeah, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And that's good. I think, you hear about the scores, the Nation's report card was released a couple weeks ago. Scores that decreased. Oh no, the COVID, this is the decline. What do we do? What do we do? And sometimes the answer isn't necessarily, better jam them up with more homework, and now you're going to see 20 homework sheets instead of, the 1 or 2. There are ways to support kids in their growth, their learning. We will help them catch up. We're aware of those. And some of the many challenges we're in right now. But that's really the overview of our regions and our 2 through 8 tests.
Thank you. That was a lot.
That's how we roll.
It seems to be. Well, there's a lot to take in and think about. Dr. Black, do you have?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. First, thank you for a very clear presentation. So let me give my assessment of what we saw. I think everybody's happy with the success rates at Weber and Schreiber in most of the in the Regents exams, so that's great news. I think what I heard you express and what I saw in the data was that the elementary schools are performing, the students in the elementary schools are performing fine, but potentially could be better. And so, so they were, another way to put that is they were a little bit lower than what we might expect. We've also talked about in previous meetings, like a consistency issue that we potentially have. And then I also noticed that there was no data divided up by school, right? It's just Port Washington as a whole, even though in reality we have 5 different elementary schools. And so I just want to sort of note all of those things, for the future, that that could be an area for growth where we create some consistency and see all the schools performing at a higher level.
I think since I've arrived here in July, I've used the word consistent or consistency more than I have in the previous decade. Right? I mean, I'm being honest. I've said this from the board, the community, teachers, parents, administrators. There should be no secrets that that's my aim, right? Everything you said, I could get those breakdowns in all of 2 moments, right? So,
I was actually going to say, I know that you can cut the
Right.
data in that way in a minute.
Right.
And I'm not looking for it.
right, and this is really what I have tried to do, what we have tried to do is in a very honest, upfront, clear way, sort of set the table. Here's where we are, right? Right, and your pockets of excellence is great stuff at the secondary level in terms of what's going on, even with those fantastic passing rates. Although I'm usually a glass half full kind of guy, I didn't look at the mastery rates. Well, I think we can bump these up. So there's work to be done there. There are, in any of our elementary schools, we have some classrooms where they're killing it, others, they struggle. We get those teachers together, we get those, and then the schools, well, what's your approach? What are you using? And when we get everyone talking together, that's where we're gonna start making a difference. And I believe I said this early on. This is the key. We've got pockets of excellence. We have so many wonderful practices being done here at Fort. And we have teachers who are thirsty for effective practices. We've got to give them time to talk and communicate with each other and put them together where, hey, this is working in your classroom, your school. Can you share it? So all that stuff we can have that all readily available and will be presented and discussed internally.
Fantastic. I'm thrilled to hear all of that. I'm just gonna sit back and watch.
Okay, so, most people here know that I don't like the grades 3 through 8 state test, but given that they're here and the dad is here, I'll ask. So the first cohort to have the Common Core test in 3rd grade was in 2013. And at the time, I think our proficiency rate was something like 70%. And everybody said, oh my God, 30% of these kids are not going to graduate, which clearly for the class of 2022 is not the case. So what I'm wondering is this, and I'm not going to talk about how this data is used for other programs in the district. I'm going to save that for that other presentation. But is there any tracking of the kids who are not proficient from 3rd grade to 4th grade, whatever, to see how they're doing, since that's the belief that if they're not proficient on these tests, they're not going to graduate, which clearly is not the case. But is there any use being made of this data to track those kids through their process to see if these test scores really are truly reflective of their struggles? Am I making sense? Is that?
So I've had a lot to say about the 3 through 8 testing as well in my years. And, you sort of alluded to it, they're here. And at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, this is what's getting published. People are making decisions on where to move to perhaps based on those test results. I mean, they have consequence for our district, right? And, they do reflect the baseline of skills that our students we want to make sure they can do, right? So when those new Common Core standards back in 2014, this is going to be a predictor. But they said, I don't really want to defend the state, but they never said they're not going to graduate, but they're not on track to graduate, right? That 30%, they're not on track. And our argument always was, okay, kids, they develop at different rates, so on and so forth, they'll get on track. So I never viewed that 30% as anything realistic, if that's what it was before. I wasn't really looking at Port's data in 2014 for what it's worth. But I have reviewed the trend since I've arrived here. You can see longitudinal, really long, over the last 12, 15 years. That said, so there is just a natural growth that happens, but there are practical things we can do to provide support and identify students. We need to make sure we're identifying students far earlier than 3rd grade who are struggling, especially with the reading, literacy skills, numeracy skills. Those in that early intervention is so important. And we have this sort of we give NWEA all the time. I think we can do a better job using NWEA to monitor students' growth, if you will, and how they're progressing through. So, you know, what you've described are things I've commissioned, if you will, in my previous lives, a data story. You know, here are, 14 kids that were in this class in grade 8. Talk to me about their progress through high school, and those can be very powerful stories. I'm not sure where we are with that. I know this is something that Dr. Bear loves. She loves nothing more than a data story and an opportunity to conduct a band. But other than that, favorite things, data stories and band conducting, right? So yeah, I don't know where we are with tracking that and what the history has been, but I know that can be very powerful and it can be very informative.
We also have AIS.
Yeah.
So it's mandated, so based on scores, students who fall within a certain, proficiency or lack thereof, we have been supporting them. Actually, whatever that threshold is, we go above and beyond that threshold to support those kids, and we've always done it.
Okay, I have 2 more questions. So I'm trying to think of when the pandemic hit, that year's kindergartners, I could even go back into preschool, but just in terms of our district, that year's kindergartners, they're now in 2nd grade?
Third.
They're in 3rd grade. They're in 3rd grade?
1920.
Sorry,
Sure,
just trying to
my kid
find-
was-
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
he's in second.
So this spring, they're facing these tests, having gone through kindergarten, 1st and 2nd in a pandemic,
Mhm.
with virtual schooling for half the year, then, I mean, I know they were in class, but the classrooms, and I'm actually hearing this from some staff in the district, they're concerned for these kids, come this spring, and I guess it's countrywide, but I'm not thinking about nationwide, I'm thinking only about Port Washington. They're concerned for these kids that the standards are too high, given the fact that they may have struggled in the classroom because of the pandemic, and now you have these tests on top of that. Is the district doing anything in anticipation of that? Is there, that's just a big, broad question, but, were there learning gaps? Is this something that we're now going to be faced with in the spring? I'm less concerned about the tests in the spring and more concerned about how they're doing in the classrooms with the advanced standards, but that's not really part of this conversation, I guess. So I don't want to muddle the two, but since we're talking about the tests,
Right.
are there supports, are there extra supports given?
So my elementary school colleagues, they're not here right now, but I know for sure that they are all well aware of the gaps and the deficiencies, which point out aren't just academic, there's some behavioral struggles as well, which is impacting that. So teachers are tuned into that. They've had discussions about it. They're working on it. So they're certainly at each building, there's a notable awareness of it. Even as, these kids are approaching these lengthy tests for the first time. You've got another factor, and this would be a talking point for next year's presentation, but another factor is, the state's moving towards computer-based testing for all of the 3 through 8 tests. And as a district, we're probably going to jump in sooner rather than later, because our kids do have at least a familiarity with computer-based testing, since they do take the NWEA, even the kindergartners take the NWEA. Nobody at the state, and I've got a meeting with them a little later today, to confirm this, nobody from the state really knows how the impact of computers will play out in terms of proficiency. We don't know. But statewide, in a few years, all of those assessments will be computer-based.
Yeah, I'll hold my comments on that one. And then finally, so I noticed that we talked about the fact that in 8th grade, the math scores are dropping because we have the accelerated kids taking the algebra regents exam, and so they're pulled out of that data for the 8th grade. So if I were a data person and I were really relying on the data, I would say to myself, that is very concerning to me that there isn't a higher proficiency of the kids who are left. And so I'm wondering if anything's being looked at there, because just because you put up the high-performing kids and put them in a high-performing class, doesn't mean the kids who are left shouldn't also be high-performing within their respective realm, I guess, or.
So what, I had that same comment on the slide, right, when we were on that slide, so I don't disagree with you at all. What I will say is, a big part of this, what I've been trying to do is say again, set the table. It's out there. This is all out publicly. It's very clear publicly. It's presented to the board. It's going to be on our website. The data are out there. I'm not sure where the level of awareness has been in the past, but it's out there, and it's easier to focus on something when it's out there.
So it's on your, it's on your radar, okay, I just wanted to, I'm done, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
so
everybody, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm sure I just asked
very informative.
harder questions.
Just a couple of kind of extensions of those kinds of topics. Have we looked at, well, let me start with this. The data story that I would like to partially focus on, while I definitely want us to focus on improvement. The data story for me is, again, not being a fan of the 3 through 8 exams in terms of their validity and reliability as really being a good instrument to reflect our children's abilities or inabilities. I think the data story that I'm seeing is that while the numbers may look weak at the elementary, by the time we get to the high school, we become stronger. So is it the tests, or is it our students, or are we blaming our teachers, which we're completely not doing here? So I just want to put out there that there's more to the numbers than the numbers, right?
Amen.
So that's
I
just.
think we said that a bunch of times in the presentation
Yeah.
too, just as a reminder.
But I'd also add, like, not every student takes the 3-8 test, so it's hard information for us to use in a classroom, because it's not about every student in that classroom. So even my 8th graders that aren't algebra kids, that are math 8 kids, that test doesn't result in what we're seeing in the classroom.
That was my
Right,
question earlier.
that's
Correct, so that's
right.
what Regents kids are taking, so that's a data point we can use. To me, what we struggle with the 3-8 test is, we have an opt-out rate. So even kids that are in our classroom, in our math 8 classroom, they're not reflected in here, so
The
kids.
participation rate drops in 8th grade.
Right.
That was that previous slide to the.
Right, so the data doesn't give us a full story, we don't have stories in the middle school, because we don't have all the kids participating in the exam.
So, yeah, so I think that's just an important context for, my other issue is when this is on the website and when this is seen in, when you plug in our district report card or whatever, without the nuance of this conversation, a lot of those numbers are not clear.
That's one thing.
So that's, I think, an important part of the conversation as well. A question I have is, and maybe I missed it, please forgive me if you mentioned this. One of the data, I'm not a data person either, but one of the questions I have is talking about the validity of the 3 through 8s. What is the consistency between NWEA results and our state assessments? Does that align, or do they fight with each other?
The NWEA is aligned to New York State standards.
Right.
And the test is aligned to clearly New York State standards.
But do our kids' results align? Meaning, if we see the numbers that we see on the ELA in May, is that what our students look like all year long?
Right.
Or are there gaps?
So the problem with the NWA is it levels the kids, so as you answer more questions, they get harder and harder. So the NWA is a 6th grader can end up taking 12th grade questions.
That's my point. That's
Correct, so
my,
you're not, on a 6th grade state test, it's 6th grade material.
right, but that's my point. Are our students throughout the year looking stronger than is reflected in that, as you call it, the single snapshot?
So that I don't have an answer to off the top of my head. You know, the NWEA focuses on really, you know, sort of those minimum standards and then growth, right? So you want to make sure you've got those minimum standards, and then it pushes for growth. So if you're a fourth grader reading at a sixth grade level, it wants to see you, you know, reading at a seventh, eighth grade level.
But that's, maybe I'm just not
But
asking it properly, right?
my flip would be if they've got that growth on they've surpassed those minimum standards, that should reflect itself in the state tests.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So let's do, you know, fourth graders. Are we seeing those students on the NWEA that we should have a proficiency rate of 80 based on what we see throughout the year, and it winds up at 60?
So one of the nice things you can do, you know, especially with that works, you can pull up here the student score. So what you want to know, so Bobby Joe did not get a proficiency on the math in grade 8. Let's look at Bobby Joe's NWEA scores.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think it tells the story of whether or not
Kind of lined up.
which is a better reflection of our students.
Yeah.
And so that.
So I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. You said no matter how we feel about those 3 through 8 assessments,
They're here.
They're here, that's what we're being used as a district. That's the accountability measure, right? That's what gets published, so on and so forth. If we have good, if we're teaching to the standards, if we are, we've got good instruction in place, good interventions, good support, these scores will take care of themselves. I really do believe that. We don't have to teach to those tests.
Right.
If we focus on the standards for everyone and point out our portrait of graduate, you're not gonna see a lot of those things in the standards. So we really need to go above and beyond the standards. And the key, that early intervention, the consistent support in identifying those students will make a difference for all, you know, pre-K through 12th grade. We have so many wonderful things we're doing in Port. We want to create a more systemic approach and really, you know, make it, this is what we do. It's not what you do as a teacher or you two do, it's what we do at Port. These are instructional, this is excellence, and that's what we do.
Before we open it to the community, and I promise we're not gonna be late today. Dr. Hines,
And then that athletics test.
yeah, of course.
So real quick, thank you for, I think, an incredibly robust, not only presentation, but conversation. And I love some of the questions that were asked. Listen, there's no silver bullet in education, right? But I think one of the things our district has been lacking for a very long time is targeted professional development. And that is part of the problem. And I think one thing that has shifted since Dr. Feeney has been here, since Dr. Baer has been here, and I know certainly with our outstanding web principal, Ms. Jadwin, that she's been really focusing on with her team is targeted PD toward item analysis, using BOCES, and as Sean said, all the tools that they provide teachers. Once we start digging into the data and sharing and making that what you focus on, I think automatically, and having those conversations and taking those bridges and those gaps between 8th grade, 9th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade, you will see something that will increase test scores. Not that that's what gets us up in the morning, but it's still important nonetheless. The second thing I want to say too is, and we'll talk about this more at the on Tuesday with our presentation regarding where we are as far as the status as a school district. The professional development is not just for the teachers, it's for the administrators, which has been lacking as well. So for us to enable us to have these conversations and to focus on data and other things that can't be measured, again, is moving in a wonderful direction, but it makes some people, I use this term, itchy and scratchy, because they're not used to it. So I appreciate the board being very patient with us, but I really believe us maybe going slower, at some point we will accelerate very, very quickly. And you'll see augmented test scores. But for me, it's all about, and I know for you too, it's about the portrait of a graduate, which all leads into making sure kids have all the skill sets to be successful. You, as this committee, have talked about data probably more in the past, I would say, 6 months, 8 months, and probably in the past 5 to 10 years. So that by itself, focusing on graduation rates, and that's a real testament to the board moving in this direction. So more to come. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We are putting it all out there for everyone to see. And that's the first step in order to engender trust with the community and certainly with the staff to have these hard conversations.
It's about growth,
It is, it's all about.
always about growth.
And the NWA, by the way, you know, and I know we're talking about comparing test scores and is it aligned to state test scores? We know they're normative in nature as far as how they're assessed. And we're looking at a pool of national students as opposed to students just in New York State or in Nassau County. It's another tool that really focuses on growth, which is great. And the shift that's happened, instead of 2 times a year for assessments with the NWA, it's now 3. So we're looking at data and growth over time, which is great.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out that I just want to, first of all, thank you, Dr. Feeney, and I say thank you and I welcome you because I think it's a fresh approach to listening at this table, as Dr. Hines just said, accepting things that are not exactly perfect in Port Washington. And so what I picked up on what you said is pockets of excellence, and that I wrote it in like bold, big letters, I'm like, yes. And that is something that the board has been discussing amongst ourselves and as part of our goals to try to move from pockets of excellence to overall excellence. And so I applaud your observations and I think, and I know that Ms. Javelin, I know Dr. Berry doing the same, so I applaud that. And I guess my question, and what I picked up on in your presentations is really you're making progress slides, because you talked about places in which we do certain things that are really good. And so I look forward and I'm hoping that down the line, and we as a board will hear from you sometime in the spring, sometime later on when you've had your chance to really assess, you know, what programs are working and what you would like to move forward going forward and what you need from us as a board. And what I've always said at these meetings, at the curriculum meetings, is, you know, as a board, we can help the administration really financially. So if there are programs that we are doing pockets of that we can be expanding, I would hope that you come to us so that we can help fund and make it, you know, more broad based. You did allude, and I don't know where in the agendas for the curriculum committee meeting, if there it is, that there were behavioral issues as well, as opposed to just when we were talking about the testing, not just developmental issues because of COVID and the testing. Are we discussing anywhere? I don't remember
We have social
honestly.
emotional learning on for June.
So my question, I guess, to the committee is maybe we move it, and I don't know what your timing is, but again, as a Board of Education, our job is to support the administration or as far as financial concerns. And I don't know if we are doing anything, if we need to add any sort of programming to help with the behavioral, which really does work towards the mental health standards, which I know the state is talking about. I also know that we have local, North Shore University Hospital, for instance, is doing programs with other local school districts, our neighbors, Roslyn, Manhasset, Northwest, right? So I don't want us to miss out on any opportunities that we could. So I'm just giving you timing wise, if there's something that you want to maybe consider going forward. I don't want to miss out on any budgetary implications as a board. That was all I had to comment on. Thank you.
Nancy?
Thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I just wanted to, since the NWEA was touched on, I just wanted to add that as a parent of a child who's now taken NWA many times, unfortunately, I've yet to get either I get not a good explanation of my child's scores, or they seem to be hugely important and it's brought up to me in a conference, or, or told, don't worry about this doesn't really apply to your child. The answers are all over the map, and I'm honestly hungry to really understand her scores. I know they're not, they're not hugely important, I guess, but I would just kind of like to understand them. And so I just encourage some maybe professional development, and just a standardization of how they're communicated to parents, since they take them 3 times a year, and it's a big part of their testing experience, I guess. And then just in terms of the opt-out situation with the 3 to 8 tests, not to make any comments pro or against opting out, but just a lot of parents are not aware that there are implications to opting out their children, because we do use those scores for the PEP criteria, and that's an entirely different discussion. But I think it's just not transparent when they're told that it really is totally fine to opt out. It has no implication. In the past, we brought this up, and I know the NWA scores can be used as well, which they do sit for, but it's just one less criteria that could help them gain entrance to one of these programs at Ford. And I don't think parents have any real awareness that when they make that decision, they could be having, it can really negatively impact their child. I strongly considered opting my daughter out, but because I followed the PEP process from when she was in kindergarten very closely, I was keenly aware that that would not be in her best academic interest as a student for Washington. So I don't think parents know that.
So regarding the NWEA, yes, everything you said, I agree. And we've already had some PD on NWEA. I think we have to do a better job communicating among ourselves, using it as a tool. I indicated that in the presentation. And certainly, I think communication to the parents, both about the NWEA scores, as well as, to opt out or not to opt out, right? What might the implications be? So those are good points. Thank you.
Tara?
Because my question is about the same thing. Because I'm curious, if we are using those data points, is anybody looking at the opt-out story? Who's opting out? Why are they opting out? And does there have any implications, anything we can learn from that information?
Yeah, okay. I haven't looked at that yet. Thanks.
Oh, Jess, I'm sorry.
No.
Dr. Hines is right.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you for this presentation. It was, as Ms. Brooks said, illuminating. I think it's something that parents have sensed or felt anecdotally, and it's really nice to have all of the information laid out here. My question is a matter of fact. Are our ENL students administered the same exams, the same assessments in the same way as native English speakers? And are they expected to meet the same expectations? And if so, how is that reflected in the data here?
Yeah, and that's part of our struggle, right? And providing them with support. I had this conversation with a teacher just on Wednesday. Some of her younger students, the language deficiencies are really alarming to her. Projecting ahead a few months when they're going to have to sit down for these, I don't know how this is going to happen. So yes, that's part of the challenge.
And I think it's, as you mentioned, this data sort of looked at in a vacuum impacts people's decisions about where to move, where to send their kids to school. And I don't think parents really understand that in a district with a substantial ELL population, where we really believe that diversity is our strength, how that's captured in the data that goes out to the world. So I think that's something that could be really important. I would also, to Tara's point around the opt-out, opt-in story, I would be very interested to see who's opting out
and who's opting in, and whether you're seeing a larger percentage, a larger share of, say, our ELL students participating because perhaps their families are understanding the communications about opting out. So you have a large percentage of, a large share of high achieving students who feel like they have to take the test. You have a large share of families who may not understand the communications. And we're looking at the data in sort of the absence of that contextual information.
Anecdotally, I was a principal of an 8 through 12 school, right? So anecdotally, that has been my experience.
Yeah.
Who's opting out?
Yeah.
Kids that don't need to opt out.
It's a really important context
Mhm.
for the community
That's
to
a good
understand the data we're looking at.
Just so you know, regions are offered in different languages,
Yes.
and, depending on what modifications they get, they do get a translated service for the math test, not for the English test, because the English is an English test. But there are accommodations that are made for students.
So that's so interesting that it's done at the Regents level, but not at the ELA. Obviously ELA would not be, but the math at the elementary.
Especially
Well,
with
right, grade
yeah, in math, which is so mediated by language.
When I taught in California, they did, the students who were primary language, they took the test in their primary language, whatever that primary language.
No, the 3-day test also, we can request language, I'm sorry, the state test, we can request language also. So they get both languages, they get their language and they get the language, English test.
So our students can choose to take the math assessments in their native language?
Yes.
Yes, Spanish for us.
Oh, that's
Right, but we actually get Japanese, like I've seen like all languages, because when
Yeah.
you're looking
you
at
can
them,
request
we
any.
put the test books inside of the English textbook, but they do.
But only for the math proficiency.
Oh,
Only
Correct.
for math, because it's
Right.
math versus English. And then students that are new to the country have exemptions
For a limited amount.
for a limited amount of time.
George, super quick.
Yeah, I just
I
want
feel
to say,
badly.
you know, for many years I have advocated for the LWEA, which I like to call maths. Because we 3 times, some districts do. And I know the teachers receive information very detailed about each one of their students. When Nancy's talking about, and I'm talking to the teacher could just look at and have a very detailed view of how the student is doing in that class, in that school, in that district, and then to the state. So maybe we should expand the LWEA to the high schools, to the high school years, and maybe compare to see how those students are tracking until they graduate. Nothing can be improved unless you have consistent, competent instruction. Many superintendents have said it through the years. You have that, you're gonna have a lot of success. Even for everyone, I'm talking about elite, all the students.
And I will just add on, not just the consistent, we've got a lot of that instruction. It is also the interventions and the support. All of that is part of that larger instructional piece. And if I'm a classroom teacher, and and I've got a large population of XYZ, whether they're students struggling with their behavior or ENL students, newly arrived, I need more support than what I can do, alone in the classroom. And that's where, as a school, as a district, making sure we have all that stuff in place. Agreed.
Thank you again for a wonderful, detailed conversation focused on growth. And I wish everyone happy Thanksgiving. We will see you in December for our next meeting, which is on instructional technology, correct?
Yep.
On December 4th again, December 4th
Yeah.
at 9 a.m. here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye, good luck, Timber. Have so much fun.
Safe travel.
Oh, I don't get you guys money too.
Make sure.
I have to get on a plane, go and see the baby. My baby's John,
Yes.
I am going to Pittsburgh Syracuse game in Pittsburgh with my son's girlfriend's